Our keynote speaker is a writer, stand up comic, and television producer. He's written for Kay and Peel and Mr. Pickles. He's done stand up on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. He's performed with the Upright Citizens Brigade in their seminal improvisational comedy show Ascat. I hope I said that right. For over 20 years. For 6 years, he was a junior high school science teacher in New York City, and he wrote one-man show about his teaching experience called Taught, which he was invited to perform at the HBO US Comedy Arts Festival in Aspen, Colorado. He sent out over 70 issues of weekly newsletter he writes called the Sean Conroy Life Letter about writing and writing in Hollywood and being in Hollywood and just being. He's hosted over 400 episodes of his podcast, The Long Shot, which takes its name from a Charlie Chaplin quote about him about how in close up life can be tragic, but everything is funny in the long shot. Which, if at first you fail, succeed. Everyone, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sean Conroy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. I have been a nightclub comic for decades, so I rarely do anything at 9:30 in the morning, much less make public appearances. So let's see how this goes. In the summer of 2001, I flew from my hometown of New York City to Los Angeles, where I live now, because I was invited to perform stand up comedy on television for the first time. I had been doing stand up for a couple of years, which is not long in terms of a stand up career, but NBC was replacing their classic show, Friday Night Videos, with something, and they decided it would be a good idea to try comedy as a replacement for Friday Night Videos. I flew out here, and the whole time I thought about how it was going to go. I knew what would happen. I knew that I would do my stand up set and appear on television. I'd be seen by casting directors and network executives at NBC. They would love my work. They'd offer me contracts for sitcoms. The other networks would hear about that. They would also offer me contracts. I'd become very successful in the comedy world. Eventually, I'd become enough of a celebrity that I'd be invited to the annual presentation of the Mark Twain Lifetime Humor Award at the Kennedy Center, not to get the award, just to be in the audience. And whoever was getting the award, whether it was, I don't know, Milton Berle or Eddie Murphy, would say, "Yes, I am the past and the present of comedy, but the future of comedy is here up in the audience. Please stand up and take a bow." And I would stand and wave. I wouldn't bow because it's odd to bow when you're standing in the audience. The president would hear about it, invite me to the White House. I would go there and be very funny and charming for the president. Eventually, word would get back to the Queen of England. She would invite me to come to Buckingham Palace, where I would be knighted. This was all what was going through my head as I flew out to Los Angeles. And I showed up to the studio for the taping the night of the show. And the host of the show was someone who I didn't know, hadn't met before, but I admired his work. I really did. He had a new sitcom that was on. So I went and I introduced myself to him backstage, and we chatted for a good half an hour. He knew a lot of people that I knew. He knew my manager who I later fired because he was far more focused on his career as a Frank Sinatra impersonator than he was on my career as a comic. That's not a good sign for a manager. But I talked to this guy for quite some time, and we really got along well. And I was very excited to have him introduce me for the show. I went to my dressing room, changed into my business suit because that's what makes a comic funny is a business suit. And the stage manager came and got me places. Uh, the host of the show went on stage, the guy who I had talked to for half an hour. All he was introduce me, say my name, and he got up and said, uh, this next guy is I don't know who the hell these young comics are. What the hell is this guy's name? I don't know. Then he pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and read my name. And I went on stage to do this stand-up set that I had crafted for several years at that point. And I was devastated. I knew that my hopes of getting to the White House and Buckingham Palace had just gone out the window. I was very upset, and the audience didn't quite know what to make of what had just happened. So in my head, I heard that old show business adage, the show must go on. And I just did my jokes. My energy was off because I was sad and angry, but I just got up there and pretended like nothing had gone wrong and hoped that the audience would get on board. And I bombed. I bombed terribly in front of this TV audience. It was my first TV appearance, so I didn't totally understand how television worked. And I didn't realize that, of course, what they would do, since it was on tape, was go back and re-record the host's intro so that he would get it right. And they would sweeten the laughs of the audience so you couldn't hear that they weren't laughing at my jokes. They were too confused about what had happened at the top of my set. And so I don't know if the clip is still out there on the internet somewhere, but I've seen it. And what you see is this very friendly, congenial host kindly introducing me, and then me coming up being furiously angry and sweating the entire time, and the audience laughing politely the whole time I'm up there. So I'm sure anybody watching at home is like, what's going on with this guy? It seems very strange to me. And, you know, the only postcard I ever got from Buckingham Palace basically said knighthood is out of the question at this point. But that was my first big experience with something really going wrong in the middle of a stand-up set and not knowing what to do. I had put so much pressure on myself and on the performance that when something happened that I wasn't ready for, I had nowhere to go. And after that, I started to pay more attention to what to do in situations where things I could not control happen, because they happen all the time. But in any situation where you're speaking in public, there are so many variables over which you have no control. I heard some of you speaking earlier about having seen improv, where people go on stage and make things up on the spot. And so while I was doing stand-up, I also was learning to be an improviser. And if I could just without getting too into the weeds, just very quickly sum up the difference between those two forms of comedy. Stand-up is a form of comedy where you write a bunch of stuff you think is funny and go on stage and hope people agree. And improv is a form of comedy where you go on stage thinking you're funny and hope people agree, and then write a bunch of stuff. So they're sort of different processes, both trying to get at the idea of what's funny. And what eventually occurred to me was I had learned things in improv that might apply to my stand-up situation. One of the things that happens in improv is you get questions from the audience, and you are taught to treat every suggestion as a gift, no matter what the suggestion is. And people say, outlandish things sometimes. And you just have to say, that's the suggestion, that's what I'm working with, and I am going to explore it and make it into something that's fun for everybody. The other thing I learned in improv was to always try to pursue whatever the most interesting thing going on in the room was, whether it was a theater or a bar or a club. Improv is all about being in the moment. So treating suggestions like a gift and being in the moment were two things that were not in my stand-up arsenal. And I decided I was going to try to start to use those. And if something went wrong, if someone forgot my name, instead of thinking of it as going wrong, why not treat that as a gift? And so over the years, that's what I started to do. Was anytime something unusual happened, I reacted to it in a way that was in the moment, that was treating it as a gift, and that was exploring it in a way that I hoped would be funny, but at least would acknowledge that the audience knew something strange had happened, unlike that first experience I had. And I never sat down and codified that as a philosophy, but because I knew I was going to do this ahead of time, I did try to do that. I sat down and I said, how could I express this as a way to go on stage with certain preconceived notions and ideas about what's going to make this work for me, no matter what happens. Because, like I said, you just never know. The world is chaotic and it's not a controlled experiment. And what I ultimately came up with, because I like putting things into neat little packages, is I would describe my philosophy as following the three P's. That's what I'm gonna call it. And each of them is something that I try to be aware of and do before and during the time I'm on stage. So I'll tell you what those three P's are. The first P is be prepared. Now I know you're saying to yourself, wait, that starts with a B, but just bear with me. Be prepared, because you can sit down and think about all the possibilities of things that could be unusual in the situation you're going into. What's the venue? Who's the audience? Is dinner going to be served? Is there going to be an open bar? Will there be the opportunity for people to go in and out while I'm speaking? What's the mic setup? What's the lighting setup? All of those things are things you can look into before you do your, I'll say performance, because for me it was a performance, but for everybody it's different. But thinking about, what if something happens with the mic setup? What if all of a sudden my mic goes out in the middle of my speech? What do I do then? And it's not a question of I know something is going to happen, but it's more the idea that if something does happen, I know what I'm going to do in that situation. Mike Tyson had a saying, which was, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And obviously he was talking about boxing, but I think that applies to public speaking as well. Look what happened to Chris Rock at the Oscars. Anybody can get it. Hopefully that never happens to anybody who's listening. But using that as a metaphor, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to punch you in the face. So be prepared. The second P is be present. Be in the room. Something strange happened that night. I was recording my first TV set, and the audience felt that. They might not have been able to put their fingers on exactly what it was that was bothering them, but something was bothering them. And I never addressed it So it never stopped bothering them, which meant that I never connected with them. So acknowledging that something is going on takes you a long way towards that thing you really want to get to, which is connection to the audience. Uh, you just you have to let people know that you saw what happened too. Even if I had just said, "Huh, that was weird," something as little as that might have set people more at ease. And instead, I just forged ahead. Imagine if, when the Titanic hit an iceberg, the cat, that was weird. Well, let's keep going. The third P is be honest. And obviously, the P in be honest is a silent P, like the P in psychiatry or psilocybin mushrooms, or the third P in pepper. Nobody says, please pass the salt and pepper. That third P is silent. But be honest. Let people know how you're feeling in the moment. It's okay to be human. It's okay to acknowledge that things are uncomfortable or unusual or upsetting. And if you let people know that and show them that you are vulnerable in that moment, again, you have a better chance of achieving connection with them. Several months after I did my TV set and it did not go well, I was invited to perform at a stand-up show, a live show in New York City. And it was kind of the coolest show in town in my mind. It wasn't at a club, it was at a bar on the Lower East Side, which is instant cred in New York. It was on Ludlow Street, just south of Houston. It was a show that had been started by a bunch of comics I really looked up to, people like Janine Garofalo and Sarah Silverman. And they wanted a space where they didn't have to worry about stand-up club audiences who wanted to hear the typical jokes that stand-up club audiences want to hear. There's a certain element of, we want to hear this type of joke when we go to a stand-up club. And these comics had jokes they wanted to tell that didn't necessarily fit into that. So I was very excited to do this show. I didn't expect my career to take off the way it was going to take off when I did this TV spot, but at least I would be in with the cool kids in the comedy scene in New York City. And I went the night of the show to the bar, and the guy who was hosting the show, again, was a comic I really looked up to, but had never met. And I knew what I should do. I knew I should schmooze this guy. So I went up and I talked to him, and I talked about how much respect I had for his work. And it turned out he knew my manager. He was like, that guy is more focused on being a Frank Sinatra impersonator. You should fire that guy. We talked for not a half an hour, but a good 10 minutes. And he went in to start the show, and I sat in the bar, and I felt pretty good about how this was going to go. And about a half an hour into the show, somebody came to me and said, "You're up next." And I elbowed my way into the room. It was packed. Everybody was there to see whoever was going to be up next. And the host went up on stage and got ready to introduce me. And he said, "Yeah, honestly, I don't know who the hell this next guy is, but he's funny. Who knows?" And I went up on stage, and I had those three P's going for me. I was prepared because this had just happened a few months before, and I knew that it was possible. So this guy got a laugh at my expense by telling everybody he didn't know and didn't care who I was. But I knew that I needed to address that. I was present because I knew that the audience had seen that and had laughed, and that if I didn't address it, I wouldn't connect with them. I wouldn't win them over. They wouldn't be on my side. And I was honest. I just told the audience straight up, hey, everybody, I was really nervous coming here tonight because I've never done this show before. But luckily, the host gave me such a warm, kind introduction and really made me feel welcome that my nervousness has instantly gone away. And I'm not saying that killed, but I will say that got a laugh from the audience that was just as big as the laugh he had gotten for pretending he could care less about who I was. And now I was kidding, and I just went on with my set, and everything went fine, and I did well, and I was invited back to that show, and I felt good about it. And the thing that stood out to me was I felt like in that moment, rather than being knocked around by whatever happened, I was in control and I was connected to that audience. So hopefully those three principles are things you can take away from this. And then the fourth, there's actually a fourth P. I lied. I said three Ps. There's actually four. It feels better to have three. For some reason, three is always better than four. It feels stronger to have three. But the fourth P is just persevere. I felt like when that TV set went so poorly, like maybe that was going to be the end of my career. And guess what? It wasn't. I've done lots of things. I thought it was going to kill my career. And I've had many opportunities to kill my career since then. And so far, I haven't been able to. So that's what I have for you. I hope you guys got something out of it. I enjoyed being here. I appreciate everybody listening. And happy Mother's Day.
Thank you, Sean. If you have a few minutes, we'd like you to be around here and see if people have questions for you. Is that okay?
Sure. Absolutely.
And should we?
Arnie is raising his hand.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Kapana and sister. Mr. Conroy, I wonder if your talent is something you learn or is it a gift? Point number one. Point number two. In poetry, it says that there's poetry in everything, object, situation, and so forth. Is that true also with humor? And what's your writing process? John Rivers was known to be writing jokes, six jokes a night. Is that something related to you or something you could admire? And lastly, who are your favorite comedians?
I feel like I need to take notes on all these questions. Let's see. So the first one, can you say the first one again?
Your talent, something you learned?
Right. Talent, learned or gift. Yeah, I think it's a combination of those two things. I think I was, when I was a kid, I mean, you know, whatever, this is me saying this, but I think when I was a kid, I was funny. I always enjoyed being funny. I enjoyed telling funny stories. I was the kid who sat in the back of the class and made jokes. But I do think there's also an element in comedy of learning the tools and learning the craft. And it takes a long time to do that. So I think that not everybody has the same level of talent or the same gift for comedy, but everybody has the opportunity to learn some of the tools and apply those tools to their work. What was the second one? Sorry.
Where do you get your material? What's your writing process?
Oh, right. Yeah, where do I get my? Right. About poetry. There's poetry and everything. Yeah, I think there is comedy in everything. I mean, I literally just walk around and start to think about, like, how could I apply this experience to something funny on stage, whether it's a funny story or whether it's just a joke. I feel like I'm constantly collecting stuff and trying to make it funny. And then it's a process of taking that stuff and putting it up on stage and seeing what works and what doesn't work and getting rid of what doesn't work and expanding on what does work. as far as writing process, I've been doing this for a long time now, and I feel like I'm still figuring out my writing process. I know that there are comics who have a very specific, like you said, Joan Rivers would write 6 jokes a night. I know Jerry Seinfeld talks about how early in his career he would just glue himself to a chair for an hour every day and just write. And if nothing came, that was okay because he was there in that seat every day. For me, I feel like what works is a little more random, that when I am struck by a thought, I sit down and try to write that out and work on it and hone it and make it into something. But I also feel like it's a self-perpetuating process. The more I do of it, the more my mindset becomes, I'm gonna do more of this. So it helps to continue to work on stuff.
And the last one is, who are your favorite comedians or role models? Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I would say that, I mean, the two who I loved the most growing up were Steve Martin, who, you know, was a stand-up, and also Peter Sellers, who was not a stand-up but a comic actor who I thought was brilliant. As far as who is somebody that I think is funny now, I mean, there's a million of them. I have a good friend named Eddie Pepitone who makes me laugh harder than anybody I've ever met in my life. There's a comic actor on television named Andy Daly who I'm a huge fan of. There's also, I mentioned before, Sarah Silverman, who's one of my favorites. Tig Notaro. I don't know. I enjoy watching a lot of people, you know.
It's okay, sir. Thank you so much. You're the best.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
The teaching, I noticed in your bio you were a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Did that prepare you in any way for comedy?
100%. Absolutely. There's no tougher audience than 30, 12-year-olds who don't want to hear about science. You know?
Yes.
So how do you make the material appealing to them? And I think one way that I really was able to use quite a bit was humor. And to connect with kids in the way that you connect with an audience was very helpful to me at the time. In fact, I had a great experience. I stopped teaching junior high school in 1995, and I moved out here to LA in 2004, and I don't even remember. I mean, some of you probably remember better than I do when we all started being on Facebook all the time and making friends with people on Facebook and all that stuff. But I went back to New York to do a show at Christmas time. My family still lives on the East Coast, so I went to visit them at Christmas time. And I posted about this show on Facebook. And I showed up to the theater. This was in 2010, so I had been away from school for 15 years. I showed up to the theater, and there were 2 young men standing by the door who said, as I walked in, they were like, "How you doing tonight, sir?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm good." I didn't recognize them. I said, "I'm good. How are you guys?" And they were like, "No, sir, we said, how you doing tonight?" And I looked at them and I was like, oh my God, it was Peter Garcia and Eric Singleton, who I had seen when they were 12 years old, and now they were in their late 20s and had shown up to this show. And they were like, "Yeah, look over there, Mr. Conroy." And on the other side of the theater was a whole section of 15 kids that I had been their science teacher when they were in junior high school, and they were there to see the show. So it was pretty exciting. So yeah, anyway, the short answer is yes. I think I love teaching junior high school.
I have a question. So, what kind of what type you like the most? Like dark one, sarcastic, and open and bright. What type you like the most, and which one you do the best?
Uh-huh. I think, I mean, I like lots of different stuff. For me, if I was to try to pin my own comedy down, it would be somewhere in the area of sarcasm, but also self-deprecation. Like, I always try to make myself the ultimate butt of the joke, even when I am talking about how upset I am with something else. It's my fault for being ridiculous. But that said, I mean, there are so many. Comedy to me is like yeah, you're good. Your test is passed. Comedy is like food. There are so many different varieties, and different people like different stuff. And I'm the same way with comedy that I am with food, which is, unfortunately, I'll basically eat just about anything. So kind of doesn't matter.
What is
Self-deprecating jokes. I'm sorry. Self-deprecating jokes must be safe. And what kind of jokes can you make out of your mustache?
Of my
Beard.
mustache?
Yeah, beard.
Beard? I don't know. That's a good question. I should sit down and write something about that. I did at one point. I had shaved my head and I had a big goatee, and I used to have a joke about how I looked like a Civil War general who had had sex with a Ukrainian hitman, but that has changed a little bit now, so I can't do that joke anymore. But it is always good to do jokes about personal appearance, because that's the first thing people notice is what you look like. So if you can say something, I mean, when I did Conan, the first joke I did on Conan, at that time, I had round glasses, and my first joke was just, I know what you're thinking. Yes, I am the older, less magical Harry Potter, because I was wearing glasses that made me look like a Harry Potter. And I also did not have a beard and a mustache at that time. So I think, personal appearance stuff is always good. Thank you.
I think Doris had a question.
Yes, I have two questions. What is the best way to deliver the humor with a serious topic? Do we go with the serious portion first and then do the funny thing, or inject the humor here and there? The second question, what kind of facial expression or gestures when we deliver the jokes to be the most effective way?
As far as addressing serious topics with humor, I think both ways that you said can be worthwhile. Like setting up something by talking about it in a very serious way, and then having the payoff be a joke, can be a huge left turn. And comedy is always about, I think we're going this way, and then we're going in this different direction. But that said, if there is a lot to the subject, the serious subject, whatever it is, writing a lot of jokes about that subject and interjecting them in between seriousness can also work very well. As far as facial expressions and how to convey comedy, I mean, you may have noticed that when I'm not going to say that this is a performance, because I'm sitting at my dining room table right now, but when I try to do stuff, I have a tendency to be very dry and very straight-faced and very letting people come to me. But there's also the exact opposite of that style, which is to be very open and to try to bring everybody in. And I think it just depends on what you like and what works for you. And I think that is part of the craft of comedy, is trying those different things out and learning what's going to work best for you. The easy thing for me about that, and it was not easy, was that I was getting up and doing stand-up every night. I assume that's probably not what a lot of you are interested in doing, but trying stuff out on different people or different groups of people, whether it's your family, your friends, and seeing like what's their reaction to this, what's their reaction to this, may be a way to ultimately help yourself in a public speaking situation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have some other
I
questions?
have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever faced an audience where culturally, because of the cultural differences, they do not respond during the performance and they wait until after the performance to show their appreciation? Have you ever had that experience?
Well, I guess I would say my answer to that is I don't know that I've ever had that experience because of culture stuff. I think a lot of the performing I've done has been in front of people from a similar background, but I have definitely had instances where I have performed and people have not felt responsive to me in the moment, and then afterwards have come to me and said, oh, that was so great. And I always am like, well, then why didn't you let me know that while I was up there? you know but I think sometimes, depending on the situation, different people are able to react in different ways, and if people don't want to exhibit how they're feeling, there's not really a lot you can do about that. And I try to remember that sometimes when I'm performing, is like, just because it doesn't feel to me like everybody is losing their minds at how funny this is, doesn't mean people are not enjoying it. It's kind of like performing on Zoom. Just because you can't see anybody doesn't mean that they're not, paying attention.
Right.
Raji has a question.
Yeah, it's a real quick one. I just wanted to find out if you're feeling stuck, either while doing improv, that idea doesn't come to your mind. What are your exact 3 things on your mind that you go to and deliver a joke or continue with your set? And similarly, when you're going for something prepared and you feel that your jokes are continuously not landing, how do you fall back?
First of all, you're assuming that I've ever had a time when my jokes are continuously not landing. I mean, that's, yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't know. For improv, I think that's not, I can't really remember that ever being a problem, because the great thing about improv is that you're always on stage with other people. So you can engage directly with those people and be truthful in the moment, and that will take you somewhere. When you are on stage by yourself, you can't really get out of that. I mean, I can remember what I will honestly say was the worst set I have ever had in my life. It was a midnight on Saturday show at a club in New York. And one of the difficulties with club comedy is that there are a lot of comics and great comics who touch on certain areas. They want to talk about sex, they want to talk about drugs, they want to talk about bodily functions, and that's just not my thing. I would much rather, talk about, like I said, Harry Potter or time travel or the rivalry between Kepler and Tycho Brahe, whatever, things that are a little bit more outside the realm of normality. And this midnight show, I went up after 2 people who each did 20 minutes of the basest jokes. And I went up, and the audience just wanted no part of me. They just were not interested. And I didn't know how to get out of it. I had to just stand up there and tell my 20 minutes. And that's part of the job, too, as a comic, is to go, all right, well, I'm here and they're here, so I'm just going to keep going. I mean, I have heard stories about comics like Larry David, and I just saw Bob Odenkirk talk about this on Bill Maher's show, where when they would go up and realize the audience wasn't into what they were saying, they were like, all right, fine, I'm going to leave and you can just talk to the next guy. But I never felt like that was okay because I was getting paid. And of course, in that set, I mean, there were 200 people in the room and it was dead silent the entire time. Imagine telling jokes for 20 minutes and it's just silent while 200 people sit there and stare at you. And at the very end, some guy under his breath, I said, okay, I'm going to do one more joke and then I'm going to get out of here. And I just heard this guy in the back of the room under his breath went, thank God. And I said, you know, sir, I am with you 100%. I cannot wait to get out of here. And that got a huge laugh. And for me, that kind of saved the set a little bit. But sometimes you just have to forge ahead, you know?
Wow. I think we have time for one more question. And Neil has his hand raised.
Thank you, Sean. I didn't have a question. I just had a comment. You talked about being prepared, being present, and then you said honest. I was looking for a word for being honest. I think the word is pure, to be pure.
I love it.
And then persevere. So I think all this becomes a recipe for the theme of today to be powerful.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
That was super awesome, Anil.
All right. Technically, I do have time for one more question. Sean, thank you so much for doing this. We so appreciate it.
Of course.
How about one more comment?
Henry, please.
Oh, one of the lines I would be a takeaway for me is that treating every suggestion as a gift. Treating every suggestion as a gift. We just had some good suggestions here and good gifts.
Yeah, and I would say, to go even further with that, not just suggestions, but everything that happens, every moment, every unusual thing is a gift that is something happening for all of us in that moment, and creating something out of that brings us closer together as an audience, you know?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please come back, sir.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.